unlimited drama series.
The dripping faucet in our kitchen had been driving me insane for 3 weeks. At 2 in the morning, lying in bed listening to that rhythmic torture, while my wife Claire pretended to sleep beside me, I finally gave up on rest. The steady drip, drip, drip echoed through our supposedly perfect suburban home, like a countdown timer to something I wasn't ready to face. I'm Eddie Harlan, and I fix things for a living. Home inspector by trade, problem solver by nature. When pipes leak, I find the source. When foundations crack, I trace them to their origin. When marriages start falling apart, well, that's where things get complicated. Claire stirred as I slipped out of bed. Her blonde hair spread across the pillow, like she was posing for a magazine shoot even in sleep. She'd always been beautiful, the kind of woman who turned heads at the grocery store and made other wives grip their husbands' arms a little tighter. Real estate was her game, and she played it well. All bright smiles and designer suits, selling dreams to families who trusted her completely. The kitchen was dark, except for the streetlight filtering through our bay window. I grabbed my toolbox from the garage and got to work on that damn faucet, letting the familiar rhythm of repair work calm my racing mind. Washer was shot, probably had been for months. Simple fix, 5-minute job, but somehow it had taken me 3 weeks to get around to it. That's when I heard Claire's car pull into our driveway. I glanced at the microwave clock, 2:47 a.m. She'd left around 11, claiming she had to meet a client about some urgent paperwork. In my line of work, you develop an instinct for things that don't add up. Late-night real estate emergencies aren't exactly common, especially not on a Tuesday. The front door opened quietly, like she was trying not to wake me. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to her heels click across our hardwood floors. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, probably checking to see if any lights were on. "Eddie?" she called softly. "You awake, honey?" "In the kitchen," I replied, not looking up from the faucet. "Fixing this leak." She appeared in the doorway, and even in the dim light, I could see something was off. Her usually perfect hair looked hastily finger-combed. Her lipstick was gone, and there was a flush to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cool October air outside. "You didn't have to wait up," she said, avoiding my eyes as she set her purse on the counter. "The Henderson deal got complicated. You know how these things go." I knew exactly how these things went, and this wasn't it. In 12 years of marriage, I'd learned to read Claire like a blueprint. Every tell, every nervous habit, every little lie she thought she was clever enough to hide. "Rough night?" I asked, finally looking up at her. "You could say that." She was already heading for the stairs. "I'm exhausted. Coming to bed?" "In a minute. Just want to finish this." She nodded and disappeared upstairs, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne that definitely wasn't mine. Something expensive and sharp, the kind of fragrance worn by men who drove cars worth more than most people's annual salaries. I finished the faucet repair in silence, testing it twice to make sure the leak was gone. Some problems you can fix with the right tools and a little know-how. Others require a completely different approach. By the time I got upstairs, Claire was already in bed with her back to me, breathing in that fake sleep rhythm that every married person learns to recognize. Her phone was charging on her nightstand, face down like always now. That was new too, the face down thing. Started about 6 months ago, right around the time she began working later and taking more client meetings on weekends. I lay there in the dark, listening to the silence where that dripping faucet used to be, and realized I just traded one kind of torture for another. At least the faucet had been honest about what was broken. The next morning brought Indian summer weather and Mrs. Fielder's weekly gossip session. Our 73-year-old neighbor had made it her personal mission to keep track of everyone on Maple Street, and she had the observational skills of a retired FBI agent. I was loading my work van when she appeared at her mailbox, right on schedule. "Morning, Eddie," she called out, wearing that knowing smile that meant she had information to share. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Sure is, Mrs. Fielder. How's the arthritis treating you?" "Oh, you know, some days better than others." She shuffled closer, glancing around like she was about to reveal state secrets. "Speaking of some days being better than others, I hope Claire's feeling all right." I stopped loading my equipment. "What do you mean?" "Well, I happened to be up late last night. You know how us old folks sleep. And I saw her coming home. She looked a bit under the weather. Flushed, and that nice young man who dropped her off seemed very concerned about her condition. My hands went still on the van door. Young man. Mm-hmm. Handsome fellow. Drives one of those fancy blue sports cars. Very considerate of him to make sure she got home safely, what with her being so disheveled. Mrs. Fielder had a gift for making innocent observations sound like indictments. She wasn't accusatory, just concerned in that neighborly way that made denial impossible without seeming defensive. I'm sure it was just a work thing, I said carefully. Oh, I'm sure you're right, dear. Though I have to say, real estate must be more physically demanding than I thought. She's been looking quite worn out after these late meetings, and that same blue car has been picking her up several times recently. Such a dedicated colleague. She patted my arm with grandmotherly affection and shuffled back to her house, leaving me standing in my driveway with a toolbox in my hands and a sick feeling in my stomach. That evening, Claire was all smiles and attention, cooking my favorite dinner and asking about my day like nothing had changed. But I caught her checking her phone every few minutes, and when it buzzed during dessert, she practically lunged for it. Sorry, honey, just work stuff. She glanced at the screen and her cheeks flushed pink. I might have to step out later. The Morrison contract needs some last-minute adjustments. On a Wednesday night, you know how it is. When clients are ready to move, we move. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I shouldn't be too late. Her wedding ring felt loose on her finger, like she'd been taking it off regularly. Another small detail that probably meant nothing by itself, but added to a picture I was starting to see clearly. Claire, I said, keeping my voice steady, is everything okay between us? The question caught her off guard. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something that looked almost like guilt flash across her face. Of course, baby. Why would you ask that? I don't know. You seem distracted lately. Distant. She forced a laugh. It's just work stress. This market is crazy competitive, and I'm trying to stay ahead of it. But I appreciate you looking out for me. She leaned over and kissed my cheek, and I caught that same expensive cologne smell clinging to her hair. The rusty anchor hadn't changed in 20 years, which was exactly why I liked it. Dark wood, dim lighting, and the kind of honest working-class atmosphere where people said what they meant and meant what they said. It was the perfect place to meet Big Mike Kowalski, my oldest friend and the closest thing to a brother I'd ever had. Mike was already at our usual booth when I arrived Thursday night, nursing a beer and working on a plate of wings. At 6'4" and built like the Marine he used to be, Mike had a way of making problems seem smaller just by being there. We'd known each other since high school, and he was one of the few people who could read me well enough to know when something was seriously wrong. You look like hell, Eddie, he said as I slid into the booth across from him. Thanks for the pep talk. I'm serious. What's eating you? I ordered a beer and spent the next 10 minutes laying out everything. The late nights, the cologne, Mrs. Fielder's observations, the mysterious blue sports car. Mike listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. Son of a bitch, he said when I finished. How long you think this has been going on? 6 months, maybe longer. I keep telling myself I'm being paranoid, but you're not the paranoid type. You're methodical. When you think something's wrong, it usually is. Mike finished his beer and signaled for another round. So, what's your next move? I need proof. Real proof. Not just suspicions and neighbor gossip. You thinking about hiring a PI? Maybe. You know anyone good? Mike grinned. Funny you should ask. Remember Lenny Briggs? Used to work homicide. Before he retired? I nodded. Lenny had investigated a break-in at one of my job sites a few years back. Sharp guy, thorough, with the kind of cynical humor that comes from seeing too much human nature. He's been doing private work since he retired. Specializes in cheating spouses, insurance fraud, that kind of thing. Want me to give him a call? Yeah, set up a meeting. We spent the rest of the evening talking about anything except my marriage, but I could see Mike watching me with that protective look he got when he thought someone was messing with his friends. By the time we left the bar, I felt like I had backup for whatever was coming next. Friday morning, I met Lenny Briggs at a diner downtown. He looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a retired cop. Gray hair, weathered face, and eyes that had seen everything twice. He slid into the booth across from me and got straight to business. Mike filled me in on the basics, he said, pulling out a small notebook. Wife's acting suspicious, staying out late, possible affair. How long you been married? 12 years. Kids? No. We kept saying someday, but someday never came. Probably for the best, given the circumstances. Now, I need to be straight with you about what this involves. Surveillance work isn't like the movies. It's boring, expensive, and sometimes you find out things you wish you hadn't. You sure you want to go down this road? I thought about Claire's face when her phone buzzed, about the cologne in her hair, about Mrs. Fielder's knowing looks. I'm sure. All right then. My rate is $50 an hour plus expenses. I'll need some basic information, her schedule, the car she drives, where she works, and I'll need a recent photo. I slid a picture of Claire across the table, taken at last year's company Christmas party. She was smiling at the camera, radiant in a red dress, looking like the woman I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. Pretty lady, Lenny observed. They always are. The ugly ones don't usually have options. His bluntness was oddly comforting. No false sympathy, no gentle handling of my feelings. Just professional assessment of a situation he'd seen dozens of times before. How long before you have something? Depends. If she's being careful, could take weeks. If she's gotten comfortable, maybe days. Most people get sloppy when they think they're not being watched. We shook hands, and I wrote him a check for a week's worth of work. Walking back to my van, I felt like I'd crossed some kind of line. There was no going back now. No pretending everything was fine. Whatever Lenny found, I'd have to deal with it. That weekend, Claire announced she had to show properties both Saturday and Sunday. Big showings, she said. Potential buyers flying in from out of state. She left Saturday morning in her silver BMW, looking professional and beautiful as always. I spent the day doing maintenance on rental properties I managed, but my mind kept wandering to what Lenny might be discovering. Around 6, my phone rang. Eddie, it's Lenny. We need to talk. That was fast. Like I said, they usually get sloppy. Can you meet me at that diner in an hour? The drive downtown felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. I found Lenny in the same booth, a manila envelope on the table in front of him. His expression told me everything I needed to know before he opened his mouth. I'm sorry, Eddie, I really am. He slid the envelope across to me. Inside were photographs, clear, high-resolution images that left no room for doubt or interpretation. Claire getting into a blue Audi, driven by a young man with styled hair and an expensive suit. Claire and the same man entering a downtown hotel. Claire and the man kissing in the hotel parking lot, her hands tangled in his hair, like she was drowning and he was air. Who is he? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Travis Dunn, 28 years old, works as a mortgage broker at Premier Financial, drives a customized Audi R8, lives in one of those new luxury condos downtown. Real piece of work, from what I could gather. How long have you been watching them? Just since yesterday, but they're clearly comfortable together. This isn't new, Eddie. I'd guess they've been at this for months. I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile the woman in them with the wife who'd kissed me goodbye that morning. Same face, same body, but somehow completely different. This Claire looked alive, in a way she hadn't with me in years. There's more, Lenny said gently. Audio. He placed a small digital recorder on the table and pressed play. Claire's voice filled the space between us, breathless with laughter. God, Travis, you should see Eddie trying to fix things around the house. He's so serious about it. Like the fate of the world depends on whether the bathroom faucet drips. A male voice responded, smooth and confident. Poor bastard probably thinks he's being helpful. He has no idea about any of it. Sometimes I think I could bring you home for dinner and he'd just ask if you wanted more potatoes. They both laughed, and the sound hit me like a physical blow. Not just the betrayal, but the casual cruelty of it. The way they talked about me like I was some pathetic joke they shared. I've heard enough, I said, reaching over to stop the recording. Lenny nodded and packed up his equipment. What do you want to do now? I can keep documenting, build a stronger case if you're thinking divorce. Not yet, I need time to process this. I understand, but Eddie, don't do anything stupid. Guys in your position, sometimes they make decisions they regret. I assured him I'd be smart about it and drove home in a daze. Claire was already there, looking tired but satisfied, like someone who'd had a very good day. How were the showings? I asked. Exhausting but productive. I think we'll get offers on both properties. She kissed my cheek, and I smelled that cologne again, stronger now that I knew where it came from. How was your day? Quiet.
A couple spa. You took her to the place we go. It was a birthday gift. She's a friend. Friends don't get $500 couples massage.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
Just caught up on some paperwork. We had dinner and watched a movie, playing the roles of a happily married couple, while I studied her face for signs of the woman in Lenny's photographs. She was a better actress than I'd given her credit for. But now that I knew what to look for, the performance was obvious. The way she checked her phone during commercial breaks, the distracted responses to my questions, the careful distance she maintained even when we were sitting on the same couch. That night, lying in bed listening to her fake sleep, I realized something had shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and immediate, but underneath it was something colder, something that felt like the beginning of a plan. Monday morning brought unseasonable warmth and a text message that changed everything. I was having coffee when Claire's phone, left charging on the kitchen counter, buzzed with an incoming message. She was upstairs getting ready for work, and for once, she'd left the device unattended. The preview showed just enough to make my blood run cold. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. T. I memorized the number and went back to my coffee like nothing had happened. When Claire came downstairs, she grabbed the phone immediately, checking messages with the practiced efficiency of someone managing multiple conversations. Everything okay? I asked. Just client stuff. You know how it is. She kissed my forehead and headed for the door. I'll be late again tonight. Big presentation. After she left, I called Lenny and gave him the phone number. Within an hour, he called back with confirmation. The number belonged to Travis Dunn, and the text messages painted a picture of an affair that had been going on for at least 8 months. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore, Lenny said. Want me to keep documenting? Yeah, but I want to try something else, too. Can you find out more about this Travis guy? Where he hangs out, what his routine looks like? Planning to confront him? Maybe. I just want to know what I'm dealing with. Lenny's research painted a picture of exactly the kind of man I'd expected. Travis Dunn was everything I wasn't. Young, flashy, successful in the kind of way that impressed people at cocktail parties. He drove expensive cars, wore expensive clothes, and lived in an expensive condo that probably cost more per month than most people made in a year. He was also, according to Lenny's sources, a notorious player with a reputation for targeting married women. Claire wasn't his first affair, and she probably wouldn't be his last. Guy's a real piece of work, Lenny reported during our Wednesday meeting. Brags about his conquests to anyone who will listen. Apparently, he's got a thing for bored housewives with successful husbands. Successful husbands? His words, not mine. Seems to get off on the challenge of stealing someone else's wife. That detail stung more than I wanted to admit. It meant Claire hadn't just fallen for someone else. She'd been deliberately targeted by a predator who saw our marriage as a game to be won. Thursday evening, I decided to see this Travis character for myself. Lenny had mentioned that he was a regular at Meridian, an upscale bar downtown that catered to the young professional crowd. I cleaned up, put on my best shirt, and drove downtown feeling like I was going to war. Meridian was everything I'd expected. All glass and chrome, with overpriced drinks and music loud enough to discourage actual conversation. I found a spot at the bar where I could observe without being obvious, and ordered a whiskey. Travis wasn't hard to spot. He held court at a high-top table near the windows, surrounded by a group of similarly dressed young men who hung on his every word. Even from across the room, his arrogance was obvious. The way he gestured while talking, the way he looked around the room like he owned it, the way he checked his phone and smirked at whatever message he'd received. I was pretty sure I knew who that message was from. I watched him for an hour, learning his mannerisms and listening to fragments of conversation when he passed near the bar. He was exactly what I'd expected. Smooth, confident, and completely lacking in any sense of shame or responsibility. The kind of man who took what he wanted without considering the consequences for anyone else. When he finally left, I followed at a distance, watching him get into his blue Audi and drive toward the luxury district. I didn't tail him home. That wasn't the point. I just wanted to see him in his natural habitat, to understand what Claire saw in him that she didn't see in me. The answer was obvious and painful. Youth, excitement, the thrill of being wanted by someone who had other options. I represented stability, responsibility, the comfortable predictability of a 12-year marriage. Travis represented adventure, passion, the intoxicating possibility of a different life. I couldn't compete with that, and I wasn't going to try. Friday night, Claire announced she was going out with her friend Janelle to celebrate closing a big deal. She'd be late, she said, but not to wait up. I told her to have fun and settled in to watch a baseball game on TV. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Mike. "Eddie, you need to get down to Meridian, now." "What's wrong?" "Just trust me, and bring your camera." I drove downtown with a sick feeling in my stomach, pretty sure I knew what Mike had discovered. I found him in the parking lot across from Meridian, smoking a cigarette and looking grim. "They're in there," he said without preamble. "Claire and Pretty Boy, and they're not exactly hiding it." Through the bar's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see them at the same high-top table where I'd watched Travis hold court the night before. But tonight, it was just the two of them, and Claire was sitting close enough to be practically in his lap. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand on his chest, looking more animated than I'd seen her in months. As I watched, Travis leaned in and whispered something in her ear that made her blush and playfully swat his arm. Then he kissed her, right there in the middle of the crowded bar, and she kissed him back like she meant it. I took pictures, lots of pictures. Clear, well-lit evidence of my wife's affair, captured through the windows of an upscale bar where anyone could see them. They weren't even trying to be discreet anymore. "I'm sorry, man," Mike said quietly. "I was having a drink with some guys from work when I spotted them. Figured you'd want to know. Thanks for calling." We stood there in the parking lot, watching my marriage end in real time through a wall of glass. After a while, Mike went home, but I stayed until closing time, documenting everything. The way Claire touched Travis's face when she talked to him. The way he possessively kept his hand on her lower back when they walked to the bar. The way they looked at each other like they were the only two people in the world. When they finally left, I followed them to Travis's building and watched Claire's BMW disappear into the underground parking garage. She wouldn't be home until morning, if at all. I drove home to our empty house and sat in my kitchen, spreading Lenny's photos and my own pictures across the table like evidence in a criminal case, which, in a way, it was. Claire had committed crimes against our marriage, our vows, and the life we'd built together. The only question now was what kind of justice the situation called for. I poured myself a drink and started planning. Saturday morning, Claire came home at 7:30, using her key quietly like she thought I might still be asleep. I was waiting in the kitchen with coffee and the newspaper, playing the role of oblivious husband one more time. "You're up early," she said, avoiding eye contact as she headed straight for the coffee pot. "Couldn't sleep. How was girls' night?" "Fun. We went to a few places, had some drinks. You know how Janelle gets when she's celebrating." I nodded and turned a page of the newspaper, watching her over the top of the sports section. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd had a very good night. Her hair was mussed in a way that suggested activities beyond just drinking with girlfriends, and she was wearing the same clothes from yesterday, always a telltale sign. "Janelle's doing well, then?" "Oh, you know, same old Janelle, always dramatic about everything." It was a masterful performance, delivered with just the right amount of casual indifference. If I hadn't seen her with my own eyes, kissing Travis in that bar, I might have believed it. "I was thinking we should do something together today," I said. "It's been a while since we spent a whole Saturday, just the two of us." Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance at having her plans disrupted. "That sounds nice, but I've got some paperwork to catch up on. Rain check?" "Sure, rain check." She disappeared upstairs to shower, and I sat there drinking my coffee and marveling at how easy it was for her to lie to me. 12 years of marriage, and she could look me in the eye and fabricate entire evenings without missing a beat. My phone buzzed with a text from Lenny. "Got more intel on your boy Travis. Meet me at the diner at noon if you want the details. I met Lenny as scheduled, and what he told me added a whole new dimension to the situation. Travis has been bragging about your wife to anyone who'll listen, Lenny said, sliding a folder across the table. Apparently, she's not just another conquest, she's a trophy. Guy's been showing off pictures of her, talking about how he stole her from some boring husband who never appreciated what he had. I opened the folder and found printouts of social media posts, screenshots of text conversations, and photos that made my stomach turn. Travis had been documenting their affair like it was some kind of achievement, sharing intimate details with friends and colleagues who thought the whole thing was hilarious. It gets worse, Lenny continued. According to my source at Premier Financial, Travis has been telling people that Claire's planning to leave you, says she's just waiting for the right moment to file for divorce. That hit me like a physical blow. Not just the betrayal, but the calculation behind it. Claire hadn't just fallen into an affair. She was planning her exit strategy, using Travis as her bridge to a new life. There's one more thing, Lenny said. Travis isn't exactly the successful mortgage broker he pretends to be. Guy's been cutting corners, falsifying documents, skimming commission. My source thinks he's going to get fired soon, maybe even face criminal charges. Does Claire know? Hard to say, but if she's planning to leave you for him, she's in for a nasty surprise. I drove home with my head spinning, trying to process everything Lenny had told me. Claire wasn't just cheating. She was planning to abandon our marriage for a man who was about to lose everything. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't destroying my life. That evening, Claire announced she was going out again. Another work function, she said. Some boring real estate mixer that she had to attend for professional reasons. Will Janelle be there? I asked innocently. Probably. You know how these industry things are. Same faces, same conversations. I nodded and wished her a good time, then called Mike as soon as she left. Time for phase 2, I told him. Mike met me at Meridian an hour later, and we positioned ourselves where we could watch the entrance. Sure enough, Claire arrived at 9:30, but she wasn't alone. Travis was with her, and they walked in together like a couple, his hand possessively on her lower back. Son of a bitch, Mike muttered. She's not even trying to hide it anymore. We followed them inside and found a table with a clear view of their booth. Claire was radiant, laughing and touching Travis's arm, while he regaled her with some story that probably wasn't half as interesting as she was pretending it was. What's the plan? Mike asked. We wait. And when the moment's right, we make sure everyone in here knows exactly what kind of woman Claire Harlan really is. We didn't have to wait long. Around 10:30, Travis got up to use the bathroom, leaving Claire alone at their table. She immediately pulled out her phone and started texting, probably making excuses to me about why she'd be late. That's when I made my move. I walked over to her table like I'd just noticed her, putting on my best surprised husband expression. Claire, what are you doing here? She looked up from her phone with pure panic in her eyes, like a deer caught in headlights. For a moment she couldn't speak, just stared at me with her mouth slightly open. Eddie, what a surprise. What are you doing here? Meeting Mike for a drink, but I thought you were at a real estate mixer. Well, this is part of it. We came here after the main event, networking. Before she could answer, Travis returned from the bathroom, stopping short when he saw me standing at their table. Up close, he was exactly what I'd expected, handsome in a generic way, with perfect teeth and hair that looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad. Travis, this is my husband Eddie, Claire said, her voice strained with fake cheerfulness. Eddie, this is Travis Dunn. He's a colleague. Travis extended his hand with a confidence that made me want to break his fingers. Nice to meet you, Eddie. Claire talks about you all the time. I shook his hand, squeezing just hard enough to let him know I wasn't impressed. Funny, she's never mentioned you. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Claire was practically vibrating with nervous energy, while Travis maintained his smooth composure like this was all perfectly normal. Well, I said finally, I should get back to Mike. Enjoy your networking. I walked away, leaving them to deal with the awkwardness of the situation. From across the room, I watched Claire frantically whispering to Travis, probably trying to figure out how to explain away what had just happened. They left 15 minutes later, and I knew I'd rattled them both. Good. It was time they understood that their little secret wasn't as secret as they thought. Mike joined me at the bar, grinning like he'd just watched his favorite team score a touchdown. That was beautiful, man. Did you see the look on her face? Just the beginning, I said, raising my beer in a mock toast. Things are about to get very interesting for Mr. and Mrs. Adultery. When I got home that night, Claire was already there, pacing in the living room like a caged animal. She pounced on me the moment I walked through the door. Eddie, about tonight. I can explain everything. Explain what? You were networking with a colleague. Nothing wrong with that. She studied my face, trying to figure out if I was being sincere or sarcastic. Right, exactly. It was just business. Of course it was. What else would it be? I kissed her cheek and headed upstairs, leaving her standing in the living room with a confused expression. Let her wonder what I knew and what I was planning. The uncertainty would eat at her, just like it had been eating at me for months. But my period of suffering was almost over. Hers was just beginning.